It's my pleasure to welcome everyone here this morning. Looks like the weather is cooperating with us a bit, and I'm sure we're all in for a great treat this morning. If you don't know much about our organization, we're the only organization in town that would present such a unique, creative, and interesting program as the one we're going to experience this morning. And we have a series of programs and lectures which are underwritten by Mr. Harold Pollman. They're called our Harold Pollman Lecture Series. And Mr. Pollman is in our audience this morning. I'd like to acknowledge and recognize Harold Pollman at this time. I'd also like to take a moment to, there he is. I'd like to recognize the executive director of the Dallas Jewish Historical Society. In the back, the short person in the back, Debbie Tobias, does a fantastic job for this organization. Don't mean to mention, I'm sorry I mentioned your height. But, and also I'd like to recognize our other fantastic, still new employee, Miss Amanda Dossie, who has put together this fabulous archival exhibition, which I hope all of you will take a look at before you leave this morning. Some of it you see here with the posters, but also in the hallway to my right is a fabulous exhibition celebrating and commemorating 100 years of Neiman Marcus. Also, we want you to join this organization, and we do have membership applications, and our latest newsletter just came out. I got mine in the mail on Friday, I believe. It's a great newsletter. I do want to recognize Sherry Roos, who was the editor of this great newsletter, did a fabulous job. We do have copies out on the tables in the foyer outside. So this morning we have this great program that you have all come out to see, and to introduce the program and our speaker, I'm now going to call upon our fabulous program director, Ms. Elia Naxon.
This is the most expensive and unique hat I've ever owned. I bought it at Neiman Marcus 40 years ago. It was an investment. I still can wear it today. It's made of leather. Beautiful. And this is just an example of how we think of the Neiman Marcus business. When Bill and I came to Dallas in 1952, the only place I knew was Neiman Marcus. And the magic continues. Okay, much of the material in the exhibit, by the way, came from Enid Klass, who was an executive secretary for Stanley Marcus in the 50s, and she has shared with us some of the memorabilia and memories with the Dallas Jewish Historical Society that'll be in our archives. And she couldn't be with us today. She lives in New York, I believe. But we send her special thanks for this exhibit. And there is an article in our journal. Where's the journal? Okay. This is not a newsletter. It is a journal. A journal. I'm correcting it because it contains information that's more than just programmatic. And it's really worth reading. And if you're a member, I save all of my journals. They're very interesting. Okay, today we're proud and happy to present the youngest of the Marcus brothers, son of Herbert Marcus Sr. and nephew of Carey Neiman. If I gave you a full bio, that would just be a bare outline of this fascinating man. I spent 2.5 hours with him a few weeks ago, and he could have told me stories for 8 hours. It was wonderful. His interesting and productive life. So what I decided to do was just ask Mr. Marcus to come up here and tell us his stories himself.
First of all, help me out. How many of you have never been to a Neiman Marcus store? Okay, that's pretty good. How many of you go back in Dallas history before 1929? Well, a few old timers around here too. Okay. I'm only 90 years old, so I don't know the full story of Neiman Marcus firsthand. However, I have heard about it ever since I was a tiny tot. I used to work at the store when I was 6 years old. I started out by sticking pin cushions for the fitters, who were serving my Aunt Carey, who was, of course, the leading salesperson of the store and was for years. My Aunt Carey worked every day that when she was well enough, and she was pretty healthy up until the very end. But a lot of people think that she had an office and was ruling because she was a half partner in the deal, but that wasn't her role. Her role was understanding customers, serving customers, enforcing the regimen that they brought on themselves of styling their purchases in a way that made the Neiman Marcus clothes distinctive. There's a great picture of her at age 20 in the display here on my right. Beautiful picture of her when she was about 20. And she was working for A. Harris and Company at that time, which was a specialty store. My father at that time was working for Sanger Brothers, which was a department store of the Marshall Field character at the turn of the century. But anyhow, when you look at the picture of Aunt Carey and see her in her Gibson girl fashion of the year 1900 or 1903, I think it is, that picture. You see of course, the tiny wasp waist, the S-shaped curve that went into the body with the butt sticking out a little bit. You don't see that in the picture, but that was the mode of the day, and that's what everybody was wearing. But you will also see a lot of embellishments on the dress that she's wearing. It's a handsome dress for that period, very appropriate. But it was shortly, it became not a la mode, at least not from the Neiman Marcus point of view. They eliminated all the lace trimming, all of the embellishment that was on the top, and opted for a very simple look, uncluttered. And that basic look has stayed as more or less a symbol of the Neiman Marcus look. It was stripping things down to bare essentials in terms of styling. Examples would be if the skirt was pleated, then you didn't have pleated trimming on the sleeve. One item, one fashion item or novelty was enough. The result was that as they went to market, the manufacturers both hated and loved them because they knew that this buying team was not about to buy it the way the manufacturer presented it. They were going to say, well, Mr. Schwartz or Mr. Jones or whatever his name was, could we take that off the sleeve? Would you change the buttons? Would you use Meyer's heavy knit instead of this less expensive knit that you're using? It was all, they were nitpickers, but they paid attention, very careful attention, and worked very hard at their jobs of this simplification process. Now, somewhere along the way, a lady came into the picture, and I have not yet been able to identify the exact date that she came on the scene, but her name was Moya Cullen, and she was a handsome woman. Of course, by the time I knew her, she was gray-haired and but had a style all of her own, and she and my Aunt Carey were the closest of buddies. I assume she came to work for the company around 1920, but mind you, that was from 1907 to 1920. That was 13 years in which the buying team consisted of the following. Aunt Carey bought dresses. Now, there's a story in that about 1907 is when the dress industry as a ready-made business began to surface. Up to that point, we only had manufactured coats, suits, and blouses. And that's what the industry, especially in New York, consisted of. Tailors from Poland and Russia and Germany had come over in the late part of the 19th century and had established very successful coat and suit businesses and blouse businesses. But no one had really taken advantage of the sewing machine, although the Singer sewing machine was invented about 1850. It really didn't become a popularly used device in manufacturing dresses until about 1907, roughly the time the store opened. Now, how did these, well, let me go on to the other duties first. Al Neiman, who was my Aunt Carey's husband, had been a traveling salesman and for the coat and suit industry. So he knew the coat and suit industry, and he became the coat and suit buyer and was that for many years. And he had a good reputation for making good deals. My father was a lousy dealer in that regard. His skill was something else. He bought the shoes and the handbags and the accessories and handled the finances and the personnel and the advertising and publicity and that end of the business. I have a letter here that you can see is rather frail, but it was written, but it expresses in a way what my father's, part of what my father's contribution was. And the letter is written on the stationery of the Hotel Ritz in Paris. And as near as I can figure, it was written in 1937, and which is way after it was started, but it's sort of interesting, so I'm going to read it to you because this typified his approach to the business, and we'll expand on that. As we are about to leave for London this morning, I'm writing a few lines from Paris, writing a few lines from here. Paris as a whole is interesting, beautiful as ever. There's an Italian exhibit of paintings which has startled even Paris. A great something, a great effect will happen as a result of this fall. But the Primitives by Cimabue, Lorenzetti, and Giotto, in their gold and golden brown and soft greens, are destined to influence the mode greatly. However, and this is key, there is nothing new to see in fashion, which was undoubtedly not true, but it shows where his interest was. His interest was in the cultural aspect of the thing rather than the commercial aspect. Enclosed are a few photos that might be seen for excellent reproduction. We leave at 11:45 by air, hoping to arrive safely. With love, I'm devotedly your father. But that gives you the general angle from which my father attacked and developed the business. He looked on the business as more of a social contract he had with the city of Dallas to present, to be their agent in looking for and finding and developing fashions, and to participate in everything that would help grow the city. He helped bring the Chicago Civic Opera to Dallas in the late 20s. He was, of course, active, as were many of the other merchants in the town, Mr. Kramer, and the Sangers, and the EM Cans, and the Linzes. They were all in business, I think all of them were in business before Neiman Marcus was. But the interesting thing is this. When you think of my father's and my aunt's education, I guess they both graduated from high school, but they were living in Hillsborough and Waxahachie back before the turn of the century, along with their brother Theo, whose granddaughter is here with us, and who was one of the original backers of Neiman Marcus. He was a cotton merchant, a very successful cotton merchant, and he helped finance the opening of the store. My grandfather came over probably from Latvia, and this is a thing the family always argued about. They claimed to be from Germany because it was more prestigious to be from Germany than it was to be somewhere else. But one day my grandmother, who was the butt of the criticism of the Marcus family, because she probably came from Poland. Well, actually, she came from Danzig. The Mittenthal family came from Danzig, which was Prussia, back in those, towards the end of that century. Let me think, where was I? I was, we were getting the family here. Yeah, Oh, my grandfather, Marcus, was a cotton broker. And that's why he ended up doing as most of the Jews did in this era. Many of them did. They went up the Hudson River, took the Erie Canal over to the headwaters of the Ohio River, and then floated down the Ohio River. That was the inexpensive way to travel as much as you could by water. That was, and anyhow, so my Marcus family ended up in Louisville before they moved to Texas, and the Mittenthal family lived somewhere in southern Illinois, also on the Ohio River, before they came and moved to Texas, just before around 1875, I suppose. Because I know my mother went to high school in Dallas, whereas the Marcuses, I think, did their high school work in the smaller towns south of Dallas. But one day, my grandmother, Lichtenstein, was visiting the Marcus home on Wendelkin. I doubt that any of you remember Wendelkin, but it's in South Dallas. Oh, you've got some people who remember that, huh? And she was looking through an album, and she was turning the pages, and she pulled one picture out from the album and turned it over, and there was a picture of one of my Marcus aunts, and it said, Riga, Latvia. And she said, I gotcha. But anyhow, the Marcus family barely accepted that notion, but at any rate, that doesn't matter. But fundamentally, my father and my aunt both were self-taught people. They read a great deal. My father's favorite literature was Plutarch's Lives. Now, I've got the set of books that he had, and I tried reading one of them a few days ago, and I went to sleep. He loved that, and the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, the Gibbons. I mean, he was a classical scholar. And by nature, he was an idealist. He was a dreamer, and a lot of people discounted him in the early stages because he was a dreamer, and they didn't expect very much of him. But as we all know, somehow or other the company survived. It does about $5 billion now, something like that. Would you like to guess how many employees there are at Neiman Marcus today? Well, I called them up the other day to find out. And right now, it is 18,592 employees, which startled me because I thought it was something like 3,000 or 4,000 or something like that. But after all, they have 50 stores of two different types. As you know, perhaps know, we used to sell our excess merchandise to Filene's in Boston. Filene's went out of business because we bought too many black velvet dresses. In fact, the buyer at Filene said, please tell your buyers, don't buy so many black velvet dresses. We can't sell them all. So, anyhow, those manufacturers went out of business too. But anyhow, the difference between running a single store and running a chain of 50 stores is a completely different problem. And when people say Neiman Marcus isn't the same as it was, it absolutely is not. But the conditions have changed immensely, and the company had to change in the course of it. But I keep looking back because people say, well, do you want to relive the past? I said, no, I just want to learn lessons from the past and try and think, what are the elements that made this such a successful business that people had faith in the company and in the product and in the service? What is it you can retrieve of that in today's operations? And that's what I keep preaching to the gang, and they don't listen. That's a common thing, but at any rate, that's the way it is. But when you stop to think of all of the companies that have expired in the last 20 years that didn't get beyond the second generation, briefly, Bonwit Teller, Best and Company, John Wanamaker's, Filene's in Boston. That's, of course, a department store. That's a different character. Marshall Field, iMagnin, Grover Magnin, Bullocks Wilshire, Goldwaters, Sakowitz. Go on and on and on. All the famous names, except for 2 or 3, have expired under at least under the earlier management or management family. And I think it has something to do with the fact that the third generations in general probably like to fish or ski or do other things besides tending to the business. I think that's probably part of it. The other part is that the skills which made companies like Neiman Marcus successful in the first place were the intense skills of knowing people and knowing customers and being interested in customers and what they had to say. And you can see if you're a $5 billion company, you start worrying about other things than that. If you're clever, you figure out a way to make it work through leadership and preaching and everything you can do to make people focus on the individual. But fact remains that the fellows who are in charge of these $5 billion businesses have got other masters that they have to bow to. And they start looking at things differently than things that made it famous in the first place. In the course of this business, of course, Stanley came along around 1926. And so from 1907 to 1926, the history of the company is largely what Al, my Uncle Al, my Carey, and my father created. They were always undercapitalized. They scrambled and they took $100, $300, $500 investments from everybody they could find, usually cousins and relatives. And in the first year, I don't know how they opened the store on the limited capital that they had, which was about $30,000. Oh, we're going to show you what the first store was. Any of you remember the first store? No, I would hope not. Anyhow, I'm going to show you what the first Neiman Marcus store looked like and what it then became. Can we see the screen here? Oh, this is, of course, the opening ad, and it's on display in front of the building, and it warrants reading because my father wrote the copy for this, as he did until about 1940. He was responsible in general for the copy of the ads, and some of you will recall that we used to occupy the first page of the second section of the Dallas Morning News, the lower half, and on the back page. This was must reading for everybody who wanted to know what was going on. And it was, we had great artwork, great attention to detail. Everything was in good taste. We did nothing that would be offensive. I remember there was a fashion for cartridge belts at one point, and we wouldn't sell them, we wouldn't carry them, we wouldn't advertise them. But anyhow, this, of course, is my father and my Aunt Carey. She always wore black or white. In the summertime, she sometimes wore a white and black print or a black and white print. But she was always a very subdued dresser. She wore there's a gold bracelet on there that she wore, and that was the extent of her elaborateness. As far as cars are concerned, my father was a Cadillac man and changed them every other year. My aunt was a Packard fan and changed every 5 years. But some of you have seen her house on Swiss Avenue, 5803 Swiss Avenue, which is a few doors away from the Theo Marcus home, which is, what's the 5731 Swiss Avenue. And I used to play football in the parkway in between on the Swiss Avenue. That goes back a year or two. Now, this was the first store at Elm and Murphy. The street Murphy no longer exists. But they leased this space. I think they paid $750 a month for it. And you can see if you had capital of $30,000 to begin with, that you just wonder how they got along. Well, they had 8 employees at that time, and most of them were relatives. Jean Garfield is here, and her mother was, I don't know, she was the coat buyer in the early days. Later on, she became the coat buyer. And we have another buyer with us today, Ms. Hunter, is that your name? Where I'm trying to see her. Anyhow, she bought the trophy room in those days. That was a sports shop thing. Okay, let's have the next. Now, this just sort of gives you a rough idea of the many additions that went on to the present building. They had a fire back in 1913, and they moved up the street for a few months while they built the first building, shown as the 1914 building. And then there were these various additions that were added on until now it's about a 9-story building and houses the entire, it doesn't house the entire Neiman Marcus staff. They lease properties in several of the office towers on Main Street. They've have a big facility out halfway to the airport where mail order operates. And other facilities like alterations got moved out of downtown to somewhere in East Texas, a few miles, 30 or 40 miles from here. It's just different things you had to do to accommodate the current problem. What's next on there? Oh, yeah. Oh, so this then goes back to the downtown store, some of which is still extant. This staircase is gone, but that staircase goes from the mezzanine. Yeah, forgot about the microphone. The staircase on the left has disappeared, but the staircase to the right is there, going up to the mezzanine. That's where the ladies' shoe department used to be, and that was one of my early jobs, working in that shoe department. That was the favorite meeting place for everybody from coming in from Sherman or Gladewater or Shreveport. We'll meet you in the shoe department, because there were chairs there. If you'll notice today, there are no chairs anywhere. I don't know what the thinking is on that, but people are invited to bring their own pods or whatnot to perch on, I guess. But at any rate, and this was the French salon in what is now in the second floor is called the Glass House, where they show featured collections. But that was the decor, as you can see. And in the opening ads, which you will read outside, my father said, "We propose to offer you a building more beautiful than anything you've ever seen, more gracious, more," he was very extravagant with words. But he lived up to it. I mean, that was the amazing thing. That for all of his boasting about what was going to happen, it all came about. And I mean, little did he think that what has happened today has happened. Now, what are those elements? Mail order, to everyone's surprise, whatever they call it by different names, has come to be about 40% of the business. Can you believe that? And that goes for expensive clothes as well as moderate priced clothes. Of course, it's heavier concentration in the moderate price, but there's plenty of more expensive clothes included in that. And many of us would never have believed that that was possible, that you could sell as much high-priced merchandise as they now manage to do. And it's a very profitable end of the business. It's the fastest growing part of the business. They keep adding new stores, and the store sales remain the same, and mail order keeps going whoop, like that. Amazing. And this is, of course, in a recent picture of the downtown store as it is today. With, did any of you? I'll bet I didn't get there anyhow. Get there for the opening, the lighting of the Christmas tree. Well, last year they had Santa Claus rappelling down the side of the building from the 9th floor down to on the Irving Street side. And this year, I kept wondering how they were going to beat that one. They had, and I didn't see it, but they had a Santa Claus coming in with a power pack of some sort, and he flew in personally. I don't know where he came from, shot out of a cannon down at the city hall or something. But at any rate, he came in under a power pack on his back. So what's going to happen next year? I don't know. We'll see. Well, I hope we'll all see. And these are just some interesting former ads where the clothes would look good today. I mean, it typifies what Neiman Marcus's approach to dressing is. It's really almost a classic look, but this was a Patullo. I remember I was the buyer at the time, and Irene, I think that is, and I don't remember who that is. But anyhow, those of you who've been at the store in the last few weeks have seen the packaging, the tote bags and all that are decorated with these old photographs from 1950s. And to think that they look as good as they do today is what's one of the amazing things to me. That's it. I believe that's all the slides we have to offer. But I think the proposition that I cited at the beginning was that I think the family felt they had a social contract with the public, and they tried to live up to that, and the present management still accepts that as the challenge. Now, I think we're ready for some questions, if anybody's got questions. Yeah, how many? Oh, wonderful, wonderful. I hope you all had pleasant memories.
I thought I knew everything. It was a learning experience.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Next time I make a speech, I'll have you stand by my side. Yes. Well, I count the web as part of the all mail order. I don't. They make a distinction, and I don't understand what the distinction is. But I'm including that. Everything that's handled out in that, they got a plant halfway towards the airport. Whatever they do out there, that's what I'm talking about. Good question. How did we develop the Fortnite concept? How did it happen? For years, we had changed our windows on Saturday nights. I remember as a child going to the Palace Theater, seeing the movie or whatever, and we would walk down the street, which was the corner of Hervey and Elm Street. We'd walk down the street to see how the windows looked after the movie. Well, that was a weekly change of the windows. Now, let's go back to 19... Anybody know the first Fortnite date? 57? Okay. Let's go back to 57. Stanley had been traveling in Europe, and he had been in Stockholm, and he saw the Nordiska company, which was a big department store in Stockholm. And lo and behold, they were doing their windows once a month. And he said, well, you know, why don't we try that? Because it's very expensive to change them once a week and all that. And so that's where the Fortnite originated from an inspiration point of view. Now, why did we pick the middle of October for the Fortnite dates? The strong surge in buying for fall, customer buying for fall, begins about the 15th of August and continues in strength up to the end of September. It's about a 6-week period where the fashion stocks are peaked and where the basic customer interest is at its greatest height. Doesn't mean that business doesn't exist before and after, but the big heights is that 6-week period. So, if we could do something the middle of October that brought in fresh goods, fresh ideas, fresh reasons for people to come down and see what's going on, that was the logical thing. Well, so that's why it got fixed on that particular date, and it was because at that date you could, the manufacturers had finished most of their production, and you could count on their being able to produce special goods for you in this period. So it all locked into a pattern. It's amazing they didn't think of it before that, but that's the way it was. Yes?
Do you think when there was much more personal service that the returns would be far less also? Did they have anything to do with the rate of returns?
When there was more service, when there was returns.
Pardon?
When there was more service, personal service in the store, were there less returns?
Were they what?
Were there less returns? When there was more service offered in the old days, were there less returns?
Oh, were there less returns?
When there was more service provided?
As I understand the question, with the increased volume, what happened with the return aspect of it? I don't think I can answer that.
But I imagine they keep track of those numbers, what returns, the dollar amount of returns.
When you're talking about returns, are you talking about financial yield or return goods? Return goods. I don't think I can answer the question. Yeah.
As part of the exhibit are some letters from some people who were offended when you first began to show people of color in your catalogs. And I know that in the 50s you all took some stands on serving customers. Could you address that?
Yeah. I'm embarrassed for the way we ran the business in some respect, but we were simply following the dictates of the community at that time. There was a period when we were happy to have distinguished singers, Marian Anderson, various other people of color, who had to call up and say, is it all right if she comes in and shops? You know, it's hard to think about that today, but that's the way it was back before the barrier was broken. And we used to open the store early for distinguished citizens who were of color because, you know, the rest of the customers in general were not very tolerant of trying on a hat that a colored lady had had on, you know. But that's the way it was. At any rate, we were among the forefront of those who finally broke down that barrier. And some of it happened at W.A. Green's right across the street from us when they did some protests. But at any rate, eventually we went ahead and bit the bullet, you know, and threw the gates open, and lo and behold, we survived.
Yes, some questions. What's the extent of the family involvement in the business today and your involvement in the business today?
Well, I have no involvement in it at all. I retired 25 years ago. I went through 3 phases in my own activity. For 20 years, I was the fashion guru, I guess you'd call it, because I was the merchandise manager of all ladies' apparel, sportswear, and shoes. So that represented a significant portion of the business. I had about 15 buyers who reported to me, and my goal was to follow in the footsteps of my aunt and my father and my brothers and whatnot, and provide these standards and make it more profitable. I had gone to Harvard Business School, which I learned a few things, not a whole lot, but I grew up a little bit in the process. And I found some things. Here's what was happening. My Aunt Carey and Miss Cullen and Miss Goldman and Miss Sadler and all these buyers and whatnot would get very enthusiastic in the market, and they'd buy a lot of goods, and they'd get home, and suddenly somebody would say, "Look, all you've got are black dresses. How come?" Well, when I came into the picture, I instituted a buying plan where we bought 20% black dresses or whatever it was, 10% navies, 5% browns, 3% green, you know, whatever. In other words, we had a plan. And we had allocations of money by manufacturers, which had never been done before. But I ended up in the 20 years that I was doing that part of the business, we made money. We made better money. Now, that's an interesting question right there. What do you think Neiman Marcus used to make as a profit? Well, the average was something like 2% of sales. And as anybody in the oil business will tell you, they spill that much. But at any rate, I had worked it up to where we were making 4% on sales. So that was a great accomplishment on my part. Later on, that was one phase of my participation from 1945 to 1965. Then I moved to Houston and built the Houston store, which is a beautiful store, of which I'm very proud. And it is one of the 3 best stores in the chain. Beverly Hills, Houston Galleria, and North Park are the 3 great stores in the chain. There's some other very good ones, but those 3 are the tops. Does that answer your question?
How about any family members today?
Today?
Family members?
No. Not a one. No, I don't think, no. Yeah.
She's going to ask you a question.
I'm Jackie Bedell Prater, and you didn't mention that in 1962, there was, can you hear me?
Speak loud. Loud.
In 1962, there was a museum open with Ann Carey's clothes primarily, and fashion arts that is now up in North Texas.
Okay.
Yeah, what was that? Yeah,
Fashion Museum in North Texas.
yeah.
It's been a long time.
Hi, hi.
Like, if you can't hear me. Now, in 1962, at the Merchandise Mart, there was an opening of a little museum with Aunt Carey's clothes that you gave to Fashion Arts
Yeah,
that is now developed into a outstanding museum up in North Texas.
yeah.
And there are a lot of Neiman Marcus clothes in there from over the years. And this museum is going to soon open again at 1900 Main,
The old Hitchhiker.
right? And it'll be available in Dallas. And that anybody that wants to see a history of Neiman Marcus clothes, they're there.
Well, I'm glad you brought it up because what we did at the end of the season, we had some merchandise. It was late delivery, and the prospects of selling them were pretty obscure at that point. And we suddenly decided, well, heck, instead of giving the stuff away, or not giving it away, but marking it down to ridiculous prices just to clear the stocks. I mean, you need fresh stock. We decided to start this Carey Neiman collection of fashions, which were often some of the very finest of the clothes that were either too high priced to begin with or whatever, or too heavy. It was often the case, or late deliveries, which was always the case. And we found that as a way to dispose of it honorably and constructively. And as a result of North Texas having that collection, and you remember where Teichkettinger used to be? That's the spot that he was talking about.
I think at the beginning, though, where Carey's clothes that you had sent him to go out in that warehouse in Haskell.
Where cosmetics is now. Yeah, there was a children's shop there. I'm happy to hear about it.
Did you, wait, let me ask that lady in the back.
Hi, you mentioned that your family had migrated to Louisville, and I was wondering if you know, did your family know the acquainted with the Kramers when they moved from Louisville to Dallas?
The Kramers and our family home were next door to each other.
I'm in Louisville.
Oh, in Louisville. No, I don't know. I know nothing about that. No, but in Dallas, the Kramer, Arthur Kramer and my father built houses next door to each other in Lakewood.
We have about 3 more questions. There's a lady in the back here, that one. Yes. Zodiac Room.
History of
The Zodiac Room.
What about it?
the history.
They want to know how they got started with the Zodiac Room. And what was her name?
Well, we had first of all, at one point, we started out with a little restaurant on our penthouse. which was intended for the employees, but everybody liked it so well that customers began going there and having lunch there. I remember very well when my father was blind in his last 10 years of his life, and this was after the recollection I'm thinking of right now was right after the end of the war, and we were sampling ice creams. And there was a test that the lady, we'll get around to the Zodiac in a minute. They tested the ice cream by letting it drip down the side of the bowl, and you judged how viscous or not it was by how long it took for it to drip. I mean, not a very scientific example. And, but the arbiter was my father. He would take a bite and he said, "That's not it." We got ice cream from Maillard's in New York, from Sticksbear and Fuller in St. Louis, from Marshall Field in Chicago, all over the country. We had ice cream brought in, and we could never find one that was really what my father liked. Till one day there was a fellow named Will Wright out in California who opened an ice cream factory, and Stanley found that one, and he had some shipped in, and my father and I remember sitting there one day, he said, "This is it," regardless of how it dripped down the side of the bowl or not. Well, now that was in the days before Helen Corbett, because Helen Corbett was a law unto herself. And one of the famous laws that she said she lived by, Mr. Stanley never said I had to make a profit. And that is why the Zodiac food was as good as it was. She used the most expensive ingredients, did it the right way. We charged for it. It survived. And she left a heritage of good eating. Now, why was it called the Zodiac? I have no idea.
I have a question about, you mentioned Filene, that became an outlet for when Neiman was finished with their business. Can you mention some of the other outlets you used? Were they jobbers? And did they have to cut out the Neiman's label when they sold stuff?
No, as far as cutting the labels out, no, they didn't. But oddly enough, it's a change in ideas between then and now. We used to cut out everybody's label, except the Neiman Marcus label in our garments. It was one of the secrets, you know. First of all, we didn't have clothes out on racks. Everything was back in stockroom. And if you didn't have a salesperson to bring things out, you didn't see anything except six pieces that were on display. But today it's all changed. And of course, the whole society has changed. The society knows more today than it did in the early days of our company. People, I mean, the magazines are better, TV is better, newspapers are better, in terms of telling the stories, and the anonymity of the source just ceased to be an issue. So I think that's the answer to your question.
We have a question back here.
ask again about that magazine with the African-American model and Stanley's letter to the customer complaining? You sort of did already address that.
I don't
This
know the
was-
answer to that.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
So,
can't help it.
okay. He already spoke a little about that, about the store's policy. It was about the magazine with the African-American model and Stanley Marcus's response. It's in our exhibit.
I want to make a comment. Yeah, I was hoping he'd tell us a little bit more about himself, but Mr. Lawrence Marcus is very modest. He really doesn't even send out biographies. But I did find out that he is a graduate of Harvard, and he was a much decorated officer in World War II, which a lot of people didn't know. I don't think any of your brothers went into the war, did they?
They didn't what?
They didn't go into the war. Only you were from the family in
Oh, no,
World
we
War
all went in the war.
Oh, they
No,
did?
well, three of us. Stanley went to Washington as the head of a committee that controlled, it was called L85, the order which conserved fabric. And everybody hated him for it because people like change. Anyhow, but he did a very good job of organizing the industry and formulating the rules. My brother Edward went into the Air Force as a lieutenant, came out a major, and he was in the Ferry Command where they were shipping airplanes from the Dallas factories to the East Coast or West Coast to be shipped to the war front. And he was stationed in Romulus, Michigan. My brother Herbert was in the quartermasters, and he was variously in the Galapagos Islands. That's a heck of a place to go, but that's where he ended up. I was a field artilleryman based on my college ROTC, trained in horse-drawn artillery. And in 1937, the year that my father wrote this letter, I was invited to go with them to Europe, and I said, no, I've got to go to summer camp as part of my ROTC training. And there we were introduced to trucks, of all things, hauling the artillery. When I was called to active duty, I was assigned to the 1st Infantry Division in Camp Blanding, Florida. We were the first ground troops to leave the country toward Europe. 18,000 of us aboard the Queen Mary, traveled across the ocean in 3 days. We did the anti-aircraft guard on board the ship, so our folks got some fresh air. We were in the invasion of North Africa and changing uniforms 3 times while Churchill and Roosevelt were arguing whether we were going to go to Norway, cross the Channel, or go to Greece. And of course, we ended up in North Africa instead. But at any rate, I was the first officer in the battalion, tank destroyer battalion, to receive a decoration. In fact, I got 2 within a couple of weeks of each other. I was attached to the French. We were mired down in North Africa by the rain, and our planes couldn't get up and protect us, so they decided to send my company about 200 miles away from the battalion to join the French. And we arrived on Christmas night and said, we're here to teach you how to use the equipment you're going to get. And they said, oh, we don't know anything about the equipment, but we're having a battle tomorrow morning. We'd be happy for you to join us. And we said, sure, we're here to win the war, why not? Well, among the things we didn't know where the water point was, we didn't know where the first aid stations were, we didn't know the ammunition dump. Ammunition, we didn't have any ammunition. We had left our ammunition train back with the battalion. But nevertheless, we joined, we had, we had a basic load, 25 rounds of 75 millimeter shells. Well, in 15 minutes, we'd gotten down to where we had to slow down. My company commander came up to see how I was doing on this battle, and as we were standing outside of my half-track, a sniper fired a bullet through his helmet, killed him, standing by my side. And again, we barely had enough ammunition to try and hit the spot where we thought the fire had come from. And anyhow, we helped evacuate the French wounded soldiers. And I think it was that more than anything else that we gave heart to the French troops. And I think that's really the basis of that commendation. The second commendation was an effort to get to Carawan, a carpet weaving town. And anyhow, I waved aside the French motorcycles. I said, let me lead the reconnaissance. That was a dumb, stupid thing to do. We destroyed an enemy tank, got an award for that. So, did a lot of dumb things. We were pretty stupid, I got to admit, for a whole bunch of us. We eventually learned. The other interesting thing is, General Patton threatened to have me shot. On 2 days before he took command, he was talking to the people in front of the division headquarters, and I was standing there, and he said, every man old enough will shave every day, officers will wear ties in combat, and everyone will wear a steel helmet at all times. And he came up to me this close and said, anyone wearing a wool knit cap without a steel helmet on it will be shot. 2 weeks later, I was shot, but not by him, but by the Germans. I was shooting at a German plane, and he dropped a bomb on me and ended up in the hospital. So, that's what I heard.
Please take, we have 30 minutes yet before we have to vacate this room. Please enjoy some of the food and take time to look at the exhibits. This is an unusual story about an unusual family. I didn't say this,
Was it made to order?
It was, but I didn't pay for the made to order. What happened was, so I bought it, I took it home, I said, maybe I won't keep it. But it looked so great with that suit. I said to myself, 30 years from now, I don't...